Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Cody University's Force Space. Thanks so much for joining us for today's event, the first event for this week, Invisible Plastics, Visible Consequences, Rethinking Health and Sustainability in a Plastic World, conversation with Sarah Sajedi. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Force Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things happening across the university. Now, we're running today's event as a live stream both to YouTube and via Zoom, so if you're joining us there, your comments and questions, very important, just pop those into the chat and we'll do our best to read those out a little later. And those of you here in the space, if you have any comments and questions, things like that, raise your hands and we'll bring a microphone around so that everyone can hear. With that, it's very much my pleasure to hand our microphone over to Professor of Biology, as well as the Principal of the Loyola Center for Diversity and Sustainability and the Co-Director of the Loyola Sustainability Research Center, Dr. James Grant. James, it's always great to have you. Good morning.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thanks to the team at Force Space for partnering with us yet again this year. I think it's our 9th annual Sustainability Cross Disciplines Conference, so good for us. And thank you for that territorial acknowledgement, Doug. I think most of us attending today are probably from Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. But if you're coming, streaming maybe, or coming from farther afield, maybe it's a good time to learn a bit more about the land on which you're situated. I'm hoping Rebecca might be able to pop something into the chat that might help with that. So this year, the theme of our sustainability conference is planetary public and personal health, well-being, and justice. In addition to Force Space, we have a number of important partners this year, the School of Health, for one, Future Earth, and our long-term partner, the Department of Geography, Planning, and Environments. Thanks to all those for helping us. And of course, who are we? We are Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability and the Loyola Sustainability Research Center. I see my colleague in crime, Sarah, sitting in the front row. Hello, Sarah. So we have 5 exciting days of programming for you and 5 events today. If you'd like to see the complete schedule, I'm hoping, again, Rebecca might be able to drop the link into the chat for people to see what the whole schedule looks like. So let's get started on this first exciting day. We kick off our conference with our keynote speaker, Sarah Sajedi. Welcome, Sarah. Sarah is the Director of Research and Development and co-founder of ERA Environmental Management Solutions, which is a leading provider of environmental health and safety software. She's currently a PhD student in the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Sciences here at Concordia. So she has many connections with Concordia. The title of her keynote address is Invisible Plastics, Visible Consequences. Sarah, so thank you so much for being here with us and kicking off our conference this year. Please take it away.
Good morning. Very nice to be here. I am very grateful. And I would like to start thanking the school for giving me this opportunity to present as a keynote speaker. First, I would like to see if you guys can see my screen. Is this coming through correctly? Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Sajedi, and it's an honor to be here at the Sustainability Across Disciplines conference to talk about an invisible pollutant and with very visible consequences. Nanoplastics in single-use plastic water bottles. Today, I'll be connecting the analytical chemistry, public health, human behavior, and policy gaps to show how something as ordinary as a water bottle can contribute to systematic exposure. I have an agenda presentation outline for you. We'll be talking about what's the problem, what's the behavior insights from global survey, detection challenges, why is this not found out before, exposure pathways, health risks, and policies and recommendations. Let's begin with history of plastics. Plastics consumption has accelerated rapidly from 1940s onward. By 2017, the world was purchasing 1 million bottles every minute. What started as a brilliant innovation in packaging quietly became a major exposure pathway for micro and nanoplastics. PET is made through a polymerization of ethylene glycol and tetraphthalate acid. The material itself is strong, lightweight, and transparent, but when exposed to UV heat, abrasion, or mechanical stress, it fragments and sheds micro and nanoplastics directly into the water we drink. Around the world, PET breaks down into smaller and smaller particles. Beaches, rivers, fisheries all show the same pattern, fragmentation leading to environmental accumulation, and what enters ecosystem often ends up in entering us. Now here, I'm going to share something personal with you. You see the picture on Phi Phi Island beaches in Thailand. In 2016, we were there, and honestly, it broke my heart. When you look up, such gorgeous scenery. When you look down, such a tragedy. And that was somewhat, I'm at my age, going back to school, that was somewhat the initiation of what triggered for me to think about my thesis and what I would want to do in my second life and second career. Also hearing about ocean massive plastics and fishermen cannot fish anymore and having lost their livelihood because of the plastic, again, was really eye-opening. Closer to home, why should we change? There was a dredging done in Philadelphia, a watershed. Data showed that 55% of what was collected as litter is plastic. And of the 55%, 77% of it is water bottles, plastic bottles. When we reduce plastic water bottles use, we tackle the most dominant contributor immediately. Now, I want to bring you some statistics. This chart shows how bottled water consumption varies widely across countries. The global average is about 9 gallons per person per year, but some countries rely on bottled water far more. I travel frequently, and last that I was in certain countries, there was no infrastructure, and the only thing that was safe to drink was bottled water. For example, places like Mexico, Italy, several times above the global average. Others, much less, often because they have strong tap water infrastructure. The takeaway is simple. Bottled water use differs dramatically by region. But in many countries, it's extremely high, and the demand directly increases exposure of micro and nanoplastics. Now, it is nice to know that I'm not alone. The number of peer-reviewed publications across the world has increased. From 2016 to 2023, research on human health and nanoplastic grew dramatically from 7 articles in 2016 to 399 articles to 2023. Research on water bottles from 2 articles to 85 articles over the same period. This sharp rise in scientific output shows that we are not working in isolation. The global research community is increasingly concerned about the micro and nanoplastic contamination. And the rapid expansion of the studies reflects collective push to understand and address this emerging health and environmental issue. Are there other pathways? Of course. Nanoplastic travels through air, food, water, but bottled water is one of the most controllable exposure routes, which is why my research is focusing on that. Sorry. For a long time, the understanding of human exposure followed this simple chain. Sunlight breaks down plastic into smaller particles. These particles enter oceans and other water bodies. Marine organisms then accumulate them, and finally, humans ingest micro and nanoplastic by consuming food, seafood mainly, that has absorbed these particles. When I was doing my master's 5 years ago, this is what I also triggered my thought about, but we drink the bottled water. What about the particles that are in it? So why particle size matters? So is all particles bad? Not really. Microplastic range from 1 to 5,000 micrometers, but nanoplastics are smaller than 1 micrometer, some as small as 0.1 micrometer. To visualize that, a single strand of human hair is about 180 micrometers. So the particles that can reach every organ in the body are tens of thousands of, tenfold smaller than a hair. Because, well, it's more like 100-fold, sorry. Size matters because the smaller the particle, the deeper it can travel in the body. Nanoplastics can cross barriers that normally protect us, including the gut lining, the placenta, and blood-brain barriers. Larger microplastics can still be absorbed, but at least lower rates. Particles that are under 150 micrometers can enter the lymphatic and circulatory system. Around 100 micrometers, they can reach liver, and 20 micrometers or smaller can reach multiple organs. But it's the nanoplastic, especially those near 0.1 micrometer, that show the highest ability to move throughout the body. In short, the smaller the particle, the more biologically active it can become. And nanoplastics are small enough to reach every organ system we have. But it's important to study the human behavior. To do so, I started with a global survey using ArcGIS 123 from October of 2023 to February of 2024 and collected responses from over 15,000 people. We asked about bottled water consumption, access to drinking water, recycling habits, and awareness of micro and nanoplastic. Although the survey reached participants around the world, about 90% were from North America. Even so, this remains one of the largest independent surveys on single-use plastic bottle behavior. The results gave us a very clear picture of how people use bottled water, why they rely on it, and what barriers prevent them from choosing refillable options. Here, I would like to discuss a little bit about the findings. It's a quick snapshot of who took the survey and why it matters, and a Sankey diagram showing these results. Most respondents were over 70% were between age of 18 and 39. And the group was mostly university educated with a balanced gender mix, giving us a solid base for comparing behaviors. In terms of pattern, younger and more educated participants use the most bottled water. Isn't that interesting? But they also showed higher recycling rates. We also saw a smaller trend. Males were slightly more likely to consume and recycle bottled water. Interestingly, older adults were the most likely to carry refillable bottles, suggesting that they may be leading the shift toward more sustainable habits. These insights help us identify who's most exposed and who's most likely to respond to behavior change. Next, we looked at what is the motivation to buy bottled water. People buy single-use plastic water bottles mainly because it's convenient, tastes good, and feels better, feels safer. They're most likely to buy it when traveling or when they don't have access to refillable stations. Recycling is limited by poor infrastructure, confusing rules, and feeling that one person's efforts don't matter. And even though 75% know about microplastics and 70% link them to health risks, use still remains high, showing a big awareness action gap. Our behavioral clusters help explain this. High bottled water users with low refillable use are cluster 0. Cluster 1 is moderate users who improve when refillable stations are available. And cluster 2, a frequent refillable users who have reliable access. The message is simple. Access drives behavior. When refilling stations are available, people use them. When they're not, even aware and motivated individuals fall back on single-use plastic water bottles. And I'm guilty of that. We have to drink. There is no question about that. Next, I would like to share another principal component analysis, clustering. This one, looking at practical travelers. These are people who rely on bottled water mainly when they're on the move, airports, hotels, events, because refill access is limited, depending on where you are in the world. influenced urbanites. Their use is shaped by social and lifestyle cues, gathering, parties, city conventions. The environment normalized bottled water use. And then the last cluster, cluster 2, is active and aware. These individuals consistently use refillables, but only because they have dependable access to clean refillable points. Across all clusters, the message is the same. Behavior is driven by access, not preference. When people have refill options, they use them. When they don't, even conscious consumers fall back on single-use plastics. Now, it's important to understand why there hasn't been much done about this. And I'm going to talk about a good colleague of mine, Lindsay, who helped me through this journey. And when we started, I think he was just humoring me, thinking that there is no particles in the bottled water. But after you will see what he saw, he became a believer. But until 2023, 2024, the instrumentation was not available. The detection nanoplastic is extremely challenging for one simple reason. They're far smaller than what most traditional tools can see. Standard techniques like FTIR or Raman spectroscopy struggle to detect anything below 10 to 20 micrometers. So nanoscale plastics often go completely unnoticed. It's like viruses and bacteria. Many, many years ago, 50, 100 years ago, people didn't really believe that existed. Nowadays, we know they do, and we know how to cure them. Newer technologies can detect smaller particles, but they come with a trade-off. For example, SRS imaging can detect plastic down to 0.1 micrometers, and SERS can pick up particles smaller than 0.05 micrometers. These tools are powerful, but they're also expensive, highly specialized, and not widely available outside research labs. I actually visited Columbia University in New York, because when their paper came out from Qian 2024, I thought, wow, this is the solution for me. I wanted to see what they were doing, but the cost was prohibitive, and we were not able to actually use such technology. Also, it's very, very difficult to set up and very time consuming. This is why no single method is enough. Each technique sees only part of the picture. Some count particles, some identify chemistry, some detect only certain sizes. To get reliable data, we need multiple methods working together. In short, nanoplastics are hard to find, hard to measure, and easy to underestimate, which is why developing standardized, accessible detection method is so important in moving forward. So, with this challenge in mind, started with a journey. And again, my professor, Dr. Ann and Lindsay, had been very instrumental in making this journey a very fun and interesting and fruitful journey. Measuring nanoplastics is extremely challenging, and one method alone doesn't give us reliable results. That is why building a multimodal 5-technique workflow where each tool fills in the gaps of the other is very important. We started with a NanoSite Pro NTA, and here you see this one. This captures total particle counts and size dispersion. Then, based on recommendations, because once the particles were seen, people were skeptical. What are these particles? Maybe they could be something else, not plastic. So SEM, EDS, confirming which plastics are present. Also, FDIR, telling us exactly what are the bottled material are made of, helping identify likely sources of fragmentation. And finally, QSense converts what we find in an actual mass of the polymer released into water. By combining these 5 orthogonal methods, we dramatically reduce the false positive and produce chemically defensible polymer verified data. We also applied rigorous QA/QC, HEPA filter hood, millicube blanks, and many more ways to allow us to have more accurate and better reliable data. And the key insight from this workflow is important. Nanoplastic particles often inflate exposure in single method studies. So if you're just looking at particles, it looks a lot, but the particles, not all, are plastics. By verifying the chemistry, we show that the true polymer counts are consistently lower than the NTA totals. So the philosophy behind this workflow is simple. One method is not enough. That's why we integrate 5, and that's why it makes the numbers truly reliable. Next, I would like to show you a short video from the NanoSite Pro NTA. This is always an eye-opening moment. And I think Lindsay really enjoyed seeing this because this was one of the all moments that you can see the particles and moving and scattering lights in real time. It gives a visual reality to something we often describe as invisible. The accompanying graph shows a consistent pattern across all brands we tested. Every single one displays a dominant particle mode around 200 micrometer, and then a steady decline in concentration as particle size increases. This tells us that the release of the ultra-small particle is not an isolated phenomenon. It's a structural behavior across brands. But here's the important part. Once we apply chemical verification using our multimodal workflow, the true polymer verification particles drop to only 10 to the 7 particles, which is like 10 million particles per liter. Initially, it was a lot higher than that. It was in 100 million when we were just looking at the particles. That's much lower than the raw NTA counts, but it is still a very significant number when we consider chronic daily ingestion. So yes, the NTA shows us the full universe of particle in the water, but chemical verification shows us exactly which fraction is actually plastic, and the number alone is not enough to be concerned. Now let's look at this multi-model analytical workflow actually revealing first under baseline condition. Just as you purchase the water bottles. So we did multiple testings. One, when you just purchase and you test the bottles. We found a very high total nanoparticle concentration ranging from 4.1, 10 to the 8, which is, to put it in, it's like 100 million, to 8.8, 10 to the 8 particles per liter. But once we applied chemical verification, only a portion of these were confirmed as true plastic. The polymer verification count ranged from 4.89, 10 to the 7, so it dropped tenfold, to 2.53, 10 to the 8 particles per liter. Still extremely significant, but much lower than the raw totals. Then when we converted this into actual polymer mass using Q-Sense, baseline bottles were containing about 5.42 and 40 to 45.35 micrograms per liter of plastic. This is different brands tested. Next, we simulated real-world handling, 12 hours of shaking combined with UV exposure. Total particle counts increased anywhere from 4% to 243%, depending on the brand. But the mass of the polymer released, the measure most relevant to biological exposure, showed an even more dramatic jump, increased from 104% to 343%. And in some cases, it reached 150 micrograms per liter. What this tells us is that everyday handling, like leaving a bottle in a car or carrying it in our backpack, can significantly accelerate particle release. So the exposure we measure directly off the shelf is actually conservative scenario. Here, how we built the exposure model. So now we measured and we know there's plastic and there is weight. But without exposure studies, without exposure modeling, it's not as much meaningful. How much of these nanoplastic RDs all end up in our bodies? No. There is a very minute amount of it that actually do get into our bodies. We combined data from 15,000 survey participants, their behavior and how much they consume, and the counts from NTA and polymer chemistry and the Q-Sense. This allowed us to model real-world drinking pattern from occasional use up to 2 liters per day. So if you know the recommended value to drink is 2 liters, and a lot of people take all their consumption from that. So the maximum exposure could be 2 liters per day. Now we found what we found. Tissue accumulation varied widely based on how much people drink and how many particles the bottle release. Higher concentrations and higher intake led to much greater internal buildup. And importantly, this represents internal exposure, particles that stay in the body, not just what is swallowed. And in big conclusion, across all scenarios, we saw a clear dose-response relationship. More bottled water and more particle equals more plastic accumulation in tissue. This highlights the need for regulatory limits, better toxicokinetic data, and stronger research on long-term exposure. Using the HESI plastic model, which was originally designed for microplastic, and adopting it to the steady state nanoplastic exposure. That's the work that I've done. We combined all of our experimentally measured data, putting these together allowed us to move beyond just knowing what's in the water, to estimating how much actually accumulates in human tissue over time. Under baseline, as purchase condition that we talked before, daily tissue burden range from 0.005 milligrams per day for the lowest release bottles to 0.045 milligram per day for the highest release brands. Yet you have to understand, I tested 4 different brands, and depending on the bottle, there were variations, and this is what you see. When you project that over a 1 year, this roughly goes to 2 to 17 milligrams of plastic accumulation in tissue annually, depending on the brand. But once we simulate real-world handling, 12 hours of shaking plus UV exposure, the numbers rise sharply. The lower release brand increased to 0.014 milligram per day, 5 milligrams per year, while the highest release brand rises to 0.1 milligrams per day, totaling 55 milligrams per year. What this tells us is important. The amount of plastic a person's body retains isn't just determined by how much water they drink. It's also shaped by how the bottle is handled before consumption. Real-world use significantly magnifies exposure. You might wonder how these things get into our body. Why nanoplastics are uniquely dangerous. Nanoplastics are far more concerning than larger microplastics because of their tiny size and ability to cross biological barriers. Once particles get below 0.1 micrometer, they are small enough to pass through cell membranes and reach protected organs. Inside the digestive system, they quickly pick up a protein. So if you pay attention to here, so these are particles, they pick up a protein coating called the corona, and they became coronated, and they fool the body thinking this is the right items, and this is how they get allowance to cross the barriers, by being coated in the protein called corona, which helps them cross the gut lining and enter the bloodstream. Instead of being excreted like the normal, most microplastics, what everybody talks about, actually gets excreted. And only very, very, very small nanoplastics are the ones that could cross the barriers through this methodology. And they can then circulate and accumulate in organs like liver, kidney, even brain. So the dangers isn't just ingestion, it's absorption and long-term buildup. And this is why bottled water becomes such an important exposure pathway. Nanoplastics can move throughout the body in ways larger particles simply can't. So the smaller, the more harmful. Sorry, yes, sorry. Chronic exposure to micro nanoplastic can affect many systems in the body. This diagram here shows that these particles don't just pass through. They can carry other pollutants and release chemicals that disrupt hormones, metabolisms, reproductive system. They've been linked to respiratory issues, oxidative stress, immune disruptions, and even DNA damage, which raises concerns about long-term cancer risk. Research also shows impact on nervous system, and the gut microbiome, contributing to neurotoxicity, intestinal imbalance. What makes nanoplastics especially concerning is that they can cross biological barriers, building up in tissues and persisting over time. The key message isn't a single pathway problem. It's a multi-system chronic health issue, and reducing exposure wherever possible is essential. It is important to know that the plastic has become and is very important globally and has been noticed. Global awareness, policy gaps, and why it matters. Global attention to plastics pollution has been raised sharply over past few decades, since 1960s. International conferences on plastic waste has steadily increased, and after 2009, when scientific studies in micro and nanoplastics surged, awareness grew even faster. But while awareness has increased, policy has not kept up. Many regions, the EU, Canada, and US, parts of Asia have banned or restricted items like bags, straws, yet single-use plastic water bottles remain largely untouched. Even though they're a major source of both plastic waste and human exposure. This leaves two major policy gaps. No regulation, specifically addressing nanoplastic in bottled water. No standard testing methods, making enforcement and comparison difficult. To move forward, we need three things: standardization in testing and clear labeling. Believe it or not, Dr. Ann arranged for me to speak to National Research Council of Canada. And they assured me that there was nothing in water bottles and I was looking in the wrong place. Extended producer responsibility to hold manufacturer accountable, and better public water infrastructure so people have real alternatives to bottled water. That standardized testing and clear labeling is really important, because unless we come up with a reasonable, affordable way to test these bottles, nobody is going to believe that there is anything harmful in them. I've looked at awareness actions and policies landscape. There is a lot of movement. We're seeing major global movement in plastic pollution around the world. Countries and international organizations are rolling out new policies, agreements, and action plans. There are now numerous global, regional, and public focus initiatives, all moving in the same direction, recognizing that plastic pollution is a shared problem that requires coordinated action. But unfortunately, none of them specifically focuses on bottled water. Meanwhile, the bottled water market is growing fast and projected to reach about 500 billion by 2030. As demand rises, exposure to micro and nanoplastics rises with it, because more bottles are purchased, transported, and consumed, each shedding particles into water inside. The trend is clear. If the market keeps climbing and we don't intervene with better infrastructure and regulation, nanoplastics exposure will climb right with it. This isn't just an economic trend, it is also a public health trend. In summary, our findings show that nanoplastic pose real and underestimated health risk. These particles can cross biological barriers, build up in organs, and persist over time. But exposure isn't driven by personal choices alone. It's driven by access and infrastructure. When people don't have reliable public water options, they default to single-use plastic water bottles, which increases long-term exposure. Our modeling shows that the chronic accumulation in plausible and it's plausible and varies by brand, especially when bottles are exposed to heat or movement. And because our current detection methods miss many nanoscale particles, we're likely underestimating true exposure. Recycling alone won't fix this. We need better infrastructure, clear labeling, producer responsibility, and standardized testing to reduce risk. Ultimately, this is the system and equity issue. Communities with poor water access carry the highest burden. If safe drinking water is human right, then reducing plastic reliance means making the sustainable choice the easy one. To reduce nanoplastic exposure, we need a few key actions. First, improve detection by investing in better tools and standardizing how labs measure nanoplastics. Second, expand exposure models so we can understand long-term health impacts. Mine is very rough. There is a lot of limitations in the exposure study I did, and there's a lot of assumptions. But based on what was available, this was the first attempt into making the model happen. So we don't know if it's overestimating or under, but definitely there's something there. Third, the most effective solution is better public water access, more refill stations where people actually are able to use. For a policy side, we need clear labeling, extended producer responsibility, and behavioral nudges that makes refillables the easy default. Overall, this requires a coordinated 3 to 5 years effort, aligning detection, infrastructure, and policy so we can move from awareness to real exposure. And this is my second career. My first career was in environmental regulations. And believe me, government intervention and policymaking is very important because there is information pollution out there. There's so much information on the internet that people don't know what to believe. But when policies are made, when government increases their mandate about testing and showing that this is true, then people can actually believe what they hear. In closing thoughts, reducing plastic reliance isn't just about individual choices. It's a systems issue. When we build the right infrastructure, set the right policies, and create the right incentives, the safer option naturally becomes the easier one. This isn't personal virtue, it's systems design. And when systems are designed well, sustainable behavior becomes the default. Thank you all for your time and attention. Reducing plastic exposure isn't about individual efforts alone. It's about building systems that make the safer choice, the easier choice. I appreciate you being part of this conversation, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that incredible talk. Perfect to start off our conference with, the environment, human health, and sustainability. What a great talk. I'll first look at, are there any questions from the audience here? I have lots myself, but, or online.
Yeah, if anyone online has questions, just pop them into the chat. We can read them out here, and if you have a question in the space, just raise your hand and I'll bring a microphone over.
So Sarah, I was, that first image you showed that really got you into your second career was that image of plastic pollution. What's the equivalent image to get us into nanoplastics, get us thinking about the human health side of it? Is it that those pictures of the particles, which is harder for people to relate to? What would you show at like an elementary school class or something?
To be honest with you, it's a tough one because, as I said, when I started, my colleagues had a hard time, they were humoring me because of my age and because of my passion. They were being nice to me and trying to, accommodate and help me in my journey. But after seeing the particle images, it was eye-opening even for myself. I really did not know the volume. So the image of the Nanosite Pro is actually very important. But then immediately the next day, the conversation went, okay, what about the calciums and iron and potentially the elements that may not, they're particles, but they may not be plastic. And I was working with another colleagues for SEM, and he was looking at, hey, there is biological matter. So the reason there's such a big difference between what NTA measures and what we end up actually as end results for polymers is because there's also biological dead matter into the in the bottled waters, a very large number of them, organic matters, and many other things that I'm actually about to publish about all the different components of chemicals that are there. So the plastics actually is a fraction. And I would say still that image of the particles flying around where you think the bottled water is very pristine and clean might have been the most effective one.
Okay. Other questions online? Nothing yet? Online question?
There is an online question. I can read that question. The question is, are there jurisdictions that have effectively addressed this?
Honestly, I did a deep dive in my start of my dissertation and study, did a deep dive in regulations. And except California and very limited scope, there hasn't been anything directly toward single-use plastic water bottles. There's a lot about other single-use, but not single-use water bottles. And it was very surprising to me to see that. So no, there is not major regulations. There are a lot of regulations for returning, and actually we've seen some in Canada recently. They're now giving incentives for returning the water bottles by giving 5 cents per bottle or something, which is still a great initiative because it allows people to return them and it doesn't end up in our water bodies and in garbage. But except that, there is not much out there.
Great. Other questions? Sarah, how much environmental microplastics would be in Montreal tap water? And so then if I compared Montreal tap water to the average bottle brand, how much more is in it? Is it 1,000-fold higher? Or
there is, because of what I showed, if you recall, there was that image that I showed about plastics of different types degrading and then ending up in oceans and water bodies and then consumed by fish and crustaceans and then humans. There is plastic everywhere. And yes, there are plastics and microplastics and nanoplastics in water, tap water. And that's why there should be investment made in filtration. And now that we know they exist, there could be filtration. I'm a chemist. when I started my career. I studied actually in Concordia chemistry in 1990s. And my first job was testing for fumigants and pesticides in water, wells where you drink. And they came up with nice, very good filters that would filter out from the groundwater the pesticides. So the drinking water that was being used did not show any of the harmful pesticides. And so I would say there has to be efforts made in both tap water and any other drinking water we do for filtration and additional exposure reductions. But the work that we do today, I was concentrating on single-use water bottles.
Sure. So the recycling of the bottle is good for environmental plastics, but the human health is about drinking the water. Yeah,
yes.
That is something we don't think about enough. Yeah, you've made that clear. I think there are other questions in the chat.
There are, Jim. There's a question about refillable bottles, even the metal ones. The question is, about those bottles, also generically plastic lined ones, has there been research done into how much these are leaching, and since we reuse them and wash them with soap, etc.?
So I personally have not done research, but I personally do use metal, stainless steel water bottles or glass. I do know that there are some studies related to refillable water bottles that they show they still can shed because they're also made, if they're made of plastic, even though as resilient, and that's why I started my talk about how hard and how the structure seems very stable, but through use and the exposure of UV and shaking, it can shed nanoplastics. So I personally so far use, and there's a lot more work to be done. I do not intend to stop. And after I finish my PhD, I am intending to collaborate and look into hopefully working with other scientists and interested parties to figure out how to make it safer and at least provide some solution, not to just say there's a problem.
There's another question also kind of building on that from Tippy, who comments that they've actively avoided plastic around food and water for the last 8 years and wants to know if water filters remove plastic nanoparticles from tap water. And they're mentioning that they use a Berkey water filter to limit plastic exposure around water, but also wonders if ceramic filters maybe are effective in filtering out plastic nanoparticles.
Great question. I have done very minor work on that, and it showed some reduction, but I was just using the filtered water from refrigerator with a carbon based. And so I don't have any solid data on that, but I do, based on my career and what I had done in the past, I truly believe that there is filtration that can be used. And but there has to be more research, and I don't have that solid information at this moment.
Great. Another question, I think, maybe?
There's a comment from Michael who was wondering about just the general health effects of tap water compared to bottled water. And that's not just in terms of plastics, but he mentions that many people avoid tap water because of perceived negative health impacts and only drink bottled water. So kind of thinking more generally.
Well, he's not alone. There's a lot of people, and that's why my survey showed that a lot of young people or a lot of people do think that the bottled water is safer for them. And, it's a personal choice. It's not the bottled water is not something that's going to kill you tomorrow. It's a chronic health effect. It will take many years, 10 to 20 years, for it to cause the impacts because plastics don't go anywhere. They just stay there and they cause the issues. But is tap water any safer? I cannot say. And so, though I do know that the bottled waters, based on my testing, do shed a lot of nanoplastics. So it's a personal choice, and depending where you are in the world, you have to make the hard choices. If you're somewhere that the water is not safe, then water bottles are the right choice to make. And I have made that choice myself many times traveling. So it depends on where you are and what is the quality of the tap water or the filtered water you're using. It is not a blanket answer that we can give across the board to say the municipal waters are better. There are some recent studies in 2025, 2026 that say the municipal water in certain countries was tested and it was better. But again, depending on where you are in the world, it could vary. So it's a regional issue.
Do we have time for questions from Loyola? I thought I saw something.
There is one more question. I'll read out from the chat, Sarah, that's asking about leadership on this issue and where that might come from in Canada, and if you have any thoughts on that.
To be honest with you, I'm hoping to go at this as my next stage of my life. And so once I graduate this year, I intend to work toward that direction. Around the world, there's a lot of people who are working on this topic. And we can work with manufacturers of filters. The biggest problem is detection method. If there's a protocol to detect, then you can develop filters that would remove these harmful items. The problem is the detection method is not there. If you guys remember viruses versus bacteria, 100 years ago, bacteria was killing people left and right. Next, viruses were killing people left and right. And people figured out how to understand it better, come up with detection method, being able to see them and work with them. The smaller the size, the harder it is. So we have to invest in technology in detection first, because once we can detect, then we can measure removal. So if somebody says, hey, this filter works, well, let's run the water through the filter and see if the result is going to give you a better. But if you don't have the detection method, your chemistry, your filtration process, your count of particles, right now, the best I could do, use multi-methods. As I said, my colleagues, Lindsay and Dr. Ann, helped me a lot in developing something that is somewhat reliable. Is it 100%? No. Can more be done? 100%. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in developing methodology, easier way, more straightforward, affordable way to detect these particles. Then we can work on reducing the exposure. In many aspects, water bottle is one of them. It's a very direct, very harmful one, and very easy one to sort of tackle. I'm all about where can we get some actual actionable item happen. So I'm hoping to work toward that.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for your research and your presentation today and your leadership on this issue. And it's been a great start to our conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Have a successful conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jim. Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
And thanks everyone for their questions. And it's great to get those questions coming in from Loyola as well. And that's a great start to the week here. Okay, we're going to be closing up our Zoom and our live stream now, but there are many events happening this week, both at Ford Space and at Loyola, as well as online. You should check the schedule to find out what's next. Just remember this conversation remains available on our YouTube channel, and you can revisit it, you can reshare it there. And I'm just going to see you the rest of the week, right? Okay, bye.
Thanks, Doug.